Okay, so a little bit about what we're going to do next. We have David Loop, who is the Vice President of GSMOL for resident-owned communities. And he is going to give a presentation on resident-owned parks, the how and why of resident-owned parks. Unfortunately, he's not here. No, well, he never intended to be here. But what we have is we have him on Zoom. So you will be able to hear him, but you won't be able to see him. And assuming that we can get everything working right with the tech, you should be able to hear David. And then when he's done with his presentation, he'll take questions and answers. And at that point, Jamie will come back up here, and we will take turns between the Zoom and the room, so that we'll have a question from somebody in the room and then a question from somebody on Zoom. Hopefully we can go back and forth in that way. So hopefully we'll be hearing from David Loop in a minute or two.
Well, let's try now. Can everybody hear me is a good question. And I'm sure the folks on Zoom, I'm pretty sure the folks on Zoom can hear me. Can the folks in the room hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay, great. I'll start talking. Thanks for inviting me today to your meeting. I really look forward to talking with you about this subject. We've got a beautiful day in coastal California. I looked at your weather down there, and it's going to be almost 80, I think. Up here, I'm close to Santa Cruz. The fog's going to burn off, and it's probably going to be in the 70s. So it's a constant reminder how lucky we are to live in coastal California. Let me give you the quick story of how I got involved in the resident-owned park world. It goes back 20 years ago. After living in San Jose for almost 44 years, I decided I wanted to get over on the other side of the hill here and get closer to the ocean. Looked around and realized that the homes were really expensive, but I could afford a mobile home. So I thought, okay, let's do that. And that's what I did in August of 2003. About 10 days after I moved in, a little slip of paper came through the mail slot in my house, and the slip of paper was from our HOA, and it said, come down to the clubhouse on Saturday. There's a chance we may be able to buy the park. I knew nothing about this, but it sounded like a good idea to me. So I went down there and discovered a group of people who had been working on this for a while, and that things were finally starting to come together. So we actually managed to buy the park. It was an escrow that lasted 8 months, but we did get it done. And then the local paper sent out a reporter and a photographer to the park, because it was a big deal that our park became resident-owned. And they wanted to put it in the paper. So they interviewed me, and there was an interview naming me in the newspaper. Now, there are not many Dave Loops in Santa Cruz County. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one. And people started calling me from other parks saying, hey, we read about you guys in the paper. We'd like to try and do that too. How would you do that? And I said, well, I can come over and talk to you about it and help you get organized and so on. So that's how I got involved in this business all those years ago. I've got some materials which I understand that Ann has printed out for you, and that will help keep me on track as I go through these various topics. So Ann, if you could get the first page, which is, as I understand it in the booklet, it's not page 1, but you'll find it easily. It's called Resident-Owned MHP Forms of Ownership. So if the folks in the room can find that, and the folks on Zoom, now it's displayed for you. Let's talk about this. So there's different ways that parks can become resident-owned. and they're very different. The first is what's called a subdivision, and when most people think of the concept, oh, we're going to buy our park, they think that means I'm going to buy the lot, I'm going to buy the home space under my home and own that dirt. And that was a process or a method that worked well back in the 1980s and into the 1990s, but then began to work less and less well because it's just too hard to get those deals done. The problem was that the lots, when the park was subdivided, were too expensive, so you couldn't get enough people to buy in and create the subdivision. So the subdivision would fail, and in some cases, what the groups did instead was they used the corporate method, which we'll talk about in a little while. But because of the costs associated with subdivision and because of its likelihood of failure, it's not used anymore at all, really. And when I talk about an expensive lot, I'm talking about lots in the six figures, in the low six figures. That's what it would take today to buy your lot if you were subdividing your park. The other thing you may have heard about subdivision is that in some cases it's been used by unscrupulous park owners as a tool to actually break rent control. I won't go into all the details of that, only to say that about 7 or 8 years ago, GSMOL managed to get some legislation done in Sacramento to help protect people in parks that were going to be subdivided by the park owner, who really had the goal of not selling them lots, but breaking rent control. So there's now some protection for that as well, through the law, state law. The next one is what's called the Limited Equity Housing Cooperative, or LEHC, and those are pretty common in California. And that's where the park real estate is owned by the residents' nonprofit corporation. And that is a public benefit corporation. So essentially that's organized as a charitable organization. In this model, the resale price of the memberships is limited by the cooperative's bylaws, and mortgage financing comes from government or affordable housing sources. For example, you'll hear these days about what's called the MORE program, MORE program, which is administered through Housing and Community Development. MORE is the successor to a thing called the MPROP program, MPROP. That's Mobile Home Park Resident Ownership Program. So it's been around for ages, 20 years or so. In a limited equity housing cooperative, the mortgage money comes basically from the state or an affordable housing lender. The concern is that when you use state money, that subjects your corporation to regulatory agreements regarding how many very low income people, how many low income households, et cetera, that you have in the park. And the regulatory agreements extend, at least in the case of the state loans, these regulatory agreements extend for years beyond the mortgage term. And just to clarify, what I'm talking about here is the mortgage that the corporation has. In these corporate models, the individual homeowners do not have the mortgages. The mortgages belong to and are taken out by the corporation. In the case of the way the MORE program works, they will give you a 30-year loan. They'll give your corporation a 30-year loan to buy the park, and you're going to be subject to their regulations for 30 years. And you will also agree to have those regulations extend for another 20 years after you've paid the park off. So that's 50 years of regulation. That is the downside of regulation and bureaucracy dealing with the state or another lender. The advantage to this method is that it's inexpensive, relatively inexpensive. Often zero is the buy-in to become a member in one of these cooperatives. But again, the disadvantage is you've got all these regulatory strings that you have when you get affordable housing mortgage money. Another disadvantage is that the member rents are higher in this model because 100% of the purchase price is being financed. So, it goes logically when you're buying anything, a car, a house, whatever, if you don't put any money down or very little money down, then your payments are going to be higher. So that's a disadvantage there. The next type is the nonprofit mutual benefit corporation. That's the area I work in, have been working in for the last almost 20 years. And in this model, the park real estate is owned by the residents' nonprofit corporation, but it's a mutual benefit corporation. It is not a public benefit corporation, so it's not a charitable association. The resale price of the memberships is set by the local market, by the decision of the park's board of directors. Every year they take a look at the price of similar memberships in the area and then come up with the value for the memberships each year. The mortgage financing doesn't come from any affordable housing sources. It comes from multifamily commercial lenders, of which there are several across the United States that are big operations that specialize in multifamily commercial lending. Most of the time, they're not dealing with mobile home parks. Most of the time, they're dealing with large apartment complexes, public housing, things like that. So, for example, one of these lenders that I've worked with before successfully a bunch of times is Capital One Multifamily Finance, which is based, I believe, in Richmond, Virginia, and they're a division of Capital One National Bank. And so in terms of getting funds, the money is there to do this. So the advantage of this nonprofit mutual benefit corporation approach is it helps you avoid the affordable housing regulatory strings. The disadvantage is there is a member buy-in to participate, and that's relatively expensive. On average, it's $12,000 to $15,000 per household to buy in and become a member of a nonprofit mutual benefit corporation that's going to own a mobile home park. So you can see why that works a lot better than the subdivision model, where you're coming up with six figures, or either with cash or borrowing to get it to buy in. The goal of getting $12,000 to $15,000 per household is a lot easier to achieve. When we bought our park in 2005, the buy-in was $15,000, and we had over 80% of the households participated. So those are the main models there. The other thing I'd say is sometimes it gets a little confusing because there's another model out there that really isn't a resident ownership model, but it can be confusing. And that's what's called an affordable housing nonprofit. And these are businesses, essentially they're investors that purchase mobile home parks, and they enter into an agreement with the local city or county to promise that they're going to keep rents affordable and maintain the park properly and so on. The most successful of these, I think, in California is an outfit called Millennium Housing. Some of you may have heard of them. They're based down in Irvine, but they're an affordable housing nonprofit. The thing to remember here is this is not resident ownership. Your park will be owned and controlled by an outside entity, that being that being the affordable housing lender. They're a nonprofit, but they're not your nonprofit, I guess is the best way to say it. Um, so you, and as you know, when in real estate and so many other things, control follows ownership. So in this model, your group does not own the park; some outside entity does. So let's get over. Ann, if you would bring up the first page of Buy Your Park 101, and we'll cover that right now. Okay, so the first question is, why do this? Why bother to do it at all? It's always a good question. I think that there are multiple reasons, and we'll go through them, but I think the key reason to do it is to stabilize your monthly housing expenses, and by that I mean your rent, over the long term. Now, what do I mean by that? And some of you may be in a jurisdiction where you already have a rent stabilization ordinance, so doesn't that do the same job? Well, kind of, but not as well. I'll use the park where I live. It's called Aptus Knoll as an example. We bought the park in March 2005 is when we closed escrow. And at that time, we got more than 80% of our households, and we have 75 homes here. We had 63 of them agreed to become members. And to become a member, they had to do two things. They had to come up with $15,000 to buy in to the organization, into the corporation. And we had a program for folks who didn't have $15,000 cash sitting around where they could finance their buy-in and just put down 5% to make that happen, because we really wanted to have as much participation as possible. So we had 63 of our 75 households agree to pay $15,000 to become members. And then they agreed to come off county rent control, which was $425 a month, and pay a new member's rent, which was $550 a month. So that's what happened in March of 2005. So in March 2005, when I bought in, my rent went up from $425 a month. Went off county rent control, and it went up to $550 a month. Now, that's almost 20 years ago that this all happened, 18 years ago, I think, exactly. And our member rents have gone up over the past 20 years. They've gone up all the way to $620. So the point is that the rents have been effectively stabilized very well in an area where if there wasn't rent control, market rents here would easily be in the $1,200 to $1,500 a month range. We've got a deal where we have stabilized our rents. We've only had a $70 increase in monthly rent for members over the past 18 years. So that's a big reason to do this, to buy your park. The other is it secures the value of your homes. The idea is that your nonprofit corporation owns the park, and its best interests. It's here to serve the best interests of the people who live in the park. So it'll secure the value of your homes, and it also makes your homes easier to sell, because home buyers today, someone buying a manufactured home, they're pretty sophisticated, most of them, and they realize that there's an advantage to not being in a park owned by an investor. They'd rather be in a situation, they're going to feel more comfortable if the park that they live in, where they have part of the action. So that is, it makes a home easier to sell. They feel like there's less risk involved when they do that. The other thing is, if you own your park, you avoid problems if you have any your local rent control, rent stabilization is ever lost or compromised. That won't affect you because you're not working under that ordinance anymore. So that's an advantage. And it builds the park into a community and improves your quality of life. I remember the day after we closed escrow, buying Aptus Knoll. I drove down the street, and I realized that most of my neighbors were out of their yards cleaning up their yards, um, uh, because now they felt that that this was more or less their park, and they took more pride in it immediately. Um, the other advantage, you make certain the park's never going to be closed or changed to another use, which is a problem, more of a problem in some cities than others. But you preserve the park as in perpetuity as affordable housing, and you take control of your economic future why you as well. So there's a bunch of good reasons to do this. The next question is, why are there so few mobile home parks that are owned by residents in California? The exact number, I put 200 here. I believe the exact number is 181. And you can find that on an excellent website called MHPHOA, which is a website that's put up by a mobile home owners advocate down in Southern California, and that he lists all the resident-owned parks in the state. He also lists all the rent stabilization ordinances in the state, which can be pretty interesting. So there's only 181 of these parks in California, and the first one converted in 1972. So 50 plus years ago. So why so few? I think that the reason is that few mobile home park resident groups and park owners ever consider the idea. The groups don't think that they can do it. It never occurs to them that they could do this, and it doesn't occur to the park owners that these people might actually find a way to finance millions of dollars and buy their park. So they just don't consider it. Sadly, a few mobile home park groups have leadership and organization, and without that, you're not going to succeed either. So the biggest challenge is to get the residents and the park owners to understand how this works. And the other thing, which should be obvious, but is worth stating, is that whatever the deal is, it has to be a good deal for the resident group and the park owner, or it will fail. So there's an art to reaching the deal that works for both the park owner and the residents, and we'll talk about how you might do that in a minute or two. So, which ownership model is best? Well, in my opinion, as I've personally seen it work for the past 20 years or so in our park and work in many other parks, I think that the best ownership model is the resident-owned corporation model. And furthermore, that's the nonprofit mutual benefit corporation model, basically because there are fewer regulatory agreements on you. You're dealing with your corporation is dealing with a mortgage lender who they do have regulations, but they're pretty basic. They want you to make your mortgage payment every month, and they want you to take care of the property. And aside from that, you're not regulated. And in this model, the corporation owns the park's real estate, and then the corporation sells memberships to residents, one membership per household. And it's selling those memberships because it's raising money that's used to fill the gap between the park purchase price and the loan that your corporation gets. So with a little bit of luck, you'll be able to finance about 90% of the park purchase, but you've got to close that gap, and that's where the sale of memberships comes in. And again, the typical membership price that I've seen over the past 20 years is $12,000 to $15,000 per household. So if you can get 70% of the park's households to buy into this, that is to come up with the $12,000 or $15,000, and secondly, agree to pay a new member rent that is affordable to them, then if you can get 70% of participation from the households, you will own the park. You can buy it. you don't need everyone to participate. It would be impossible to get everybody to participate. And the folks who don't participate simply stay in the park, and their new landlord is the association, the corporation that owns the park. Okay, and so there's what steps lead to park ownership? There we go. Thanks, Ann. Okay, so the first step is to choose a qualified park purchase consultant for your group. And that person's job is to analyze and structure the transaction, find your mortgage financing for your nonprofit corporation, and then represent your interests in negotiations with the park owner. Now, how do you find a park purchase consultant? Well, there aren't many around. I mean, you can Google that, and I don't know exactly what you'd find, but there are not many of these folks doing this. The idea is that you need somebody to help you figure out what's going on here. If you've got an opportunity to buy the park, you're going to really have one chance to do it, and you're going to have to be effective, and you're going to have credibility. And the way to get credibility is to work with a consultant who understands what's going on, and then works with you to get the deal done. For the last almost 20 years, I've worked with the same consultant that helped us buy Aptus Knoll way back in 2005. His name is Dean Sargent. Some of you may have heard of him or talked to him before. He's a retired CPA. He works out of Medford, Oregon, but he covers the whole western coast from there. And he's experienced. He's done, at this point, he's done about 55 or 56 of these transactions. So in 55 or 56 cases, he's actually helped people buy their park. So he's got a good track record. So what you would do once you get your consultant is you communicate in writing with the park owner, and you let the park owner know your group is interested in buying the park and we're able to do it. So we want to buy it. We'll pay a premium price for it, and we have sources of mortgage financing, and we may be able to give you, Mr. Park Owner, some capital gains tax breaks that no other buyer can. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well. But you've got to communicate with the park owner. If you never reach out to your park owner, the odds are huge that you will never buy the park. You've got to get the ball rolling. Then, if you get to the park owner to the negotiating table, there's some other steps you take. You incorporate your residents association as a nonprofit mutual benefit corporation. You issue memberships in your corporation, your association, to raise the funds you need. And then this, of course, is super important. You perform property due diligence to determine the condition of the park infrastructure, that being its electric, water, gas, sewer, road systems, buildings, etc. Obviously, you have to do that. You cannot buy a piece of commercial real estate, let alone one where your house is, without understanding what you're buying and knowing what you're buying. So property due diligence involves inspections and reports before you buy the park that reveal all the problems and reveal how much it's going to cost to fix them. And that becomes a negotiating tool with the park owner as you go along. But you cannot buy a pig in a poke, as they say. After all that, you complete the transaction. You elect your board of directors. You hire a property management company to handle to handle day-to-day operations. You close the park purchase escrow, and you begin operating your park as a resident-owned community. So at this point, I'm going to grab a cough drop because I've been talking too much, and you can tell my voice just went out on me. So, pardon me while I get a cough drop here. And pardon me for making sucking noises while I suck on the cough drop too. Now, let's talk about sources of mortgage financing. And then we'll go on to the next concept. So there's different ways to get financing when you do this. There's conventional financing, which means banks. Banks are usually not a real good source of financing money, mortgage financing for your corporation when you're trying to buy the park. The problem with local banks is they like to deal with borrowers who have a track record of whatever business they're in. And your group, before you own the park, will not have a track record. So the local banks typically don't want to deal with you. I remember when we talked to a local bank before we bought our park, one of the things they wanted to know was how much money our HOA had in the bank. The answer was about $1,500 from a rummage sale and a bake sale we had. So they kind of looked at that. Strangely, they said, wait, you want to buy a $4 million piece of property and you guys have $1,500 in the bank? So banks are not a likely lender for you. The commercial multifamily lenders are, because they understand this business and they've seen many mobile home parks become resident owned, operate very successfully and very well. So they feel like they understand the risk and they're more inclined to loan to you. The Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, otherwise known as Freddie Mac, is not a lender, but they're a guarantor. So they will make it, they'll help the commercial multifamily lender put together a deal that Freddie Mac will guarantee or endorse. And that's the last 5 or 6 projects I've worked on. Freddie Mac was involved. They're a big agency. You know, they actually on a couple of these projects sent out folks from Washington because they wanted to meet the board of directors of the park and understand more about how these things worked and so on. So Freddie Mac becomes important in getting this financing. We talked about government financing. The HUD no longer is involved in doing mobile home parks. They have a program, but they haven't used it now for about 10 years. I don't know why. California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, that's the MPROP or the MORE program we talked about. What about city and county money? The simple answer is they don't have any. They're not going to loan you. They're not going to loan to you. They just don't have that. They don't have that money to do it. Now, an interesting concept we'll talk about in a second is first and second mortgages carried back by the park seller, which is a very viable source of financing because it can fit into the seller's tax planning to defer his income, his capital gains, using an installment sale. Okay, so that's the core of it. Let's see, how are we doing for time? I just wanted to touch a couple other bases, and then we can do some Q&A. And that way I can listen and I don't have to talk so much. Okay. There's an article that you should have called "Buy Your Park from Mom and Pop Before It's Too Late." Okay, and please read that article. The gist of it is this: by selling the park to your resident group and using what's called an installment sale, your resident group pays for the park over time, not in one lump sum. So basically, the park owner, who's the park seller, is carrying the paper. And by doing an installment sale, this spreads the seller's income from the sale and their tax liability over time. So it can be very appealing to them to do this. So that's really the bottom line of that article there. Is you can give the park owner an opportunity that other other buyers will not give him. If the park owner sells the park to another investor, then that park owner is going to get millions of dollars in cash, basically, when they sell the park. And that creates a capital gains problem for them. So you are the only potential buyer that will offer an installment sale program or idea to the park owner. And that makes you unique and potentially valuable, but only if you're dealing with a smaller operator. If your park's already owned by a large corporation, this won't help you. But if you've got a family type ownership, it certainly will. Okay. Next is another article. I'd ask you to read if you haven't. Take your time on it, called RSOs and ROCs, the connection. Now, what does that mean? Okay, well, it means that...
Excuse me, Dave, I just wanted to let you know we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A.
Okay. Yes. Well, in fact, let me just, rather than go through this other stuff, close with this. The idea is you can stabilize your rent. An RSO stabilizes your rent, and that's great. But another benefit that's less obvious but important is it stabilizes the market value of local mobile home parks. So mobile home parks are valued according to the amount of income they produce. And if you have a local rent stabilization ordinance, that holds down the income the park gets, and that in turn holds down the value of the park, which makes it easier for you to buy it. Santa Cruz County has 70 mobile home parks, 70. We've had rent stabilization since 1980, and out of our 70 mobile home parks, 23 are resident owned. And I think in large part it's due to the fact that we have rent stabilization. So the idea is, and I know you guys are working on it, get rent stabilization if you can. And then the other final thing, I thought I was say one thing more, and I'm saying two things more, is please read the article, Buying the Park, Do We Have a Chance? Because that will help you explain or understand your odds of buying the park. It varies depending upon your situation, and you should always try, regardless of your situation, to do this. But your chances are better if these factors that you'll find in this article are present. Okay, I'm done. Questions?
Can you hear me, Dave?
Yes, I can.
Okay. She wanted to know, her park only has 30 residents, so she was thinking that's probably too small of a size in order to buy your own park in terms of raising funds.
Not necessarily. I've seen parks. I can't think of a 30, but I can think of a couple that were 35 and 40, where it was done. So size doesn't matter that much. It is possible. That's the best answer I can give on that.
Are there any questions on Zoom? If so, please raise your hand with the Zoom app of raising your hand.
I have a question. You can ask him because you're the only one
No,
that's here.
No, you can stand right here. This is a microphone.
I just
All the way
didn't.
over here.
I didn't catch the website of the home, of the parks that are resident owned. Could you give that to me again?
Sure. It's MHP, so Mike Hotel Papa HOA, Hotel Oscar Alpha
Yep,
dot com.
thank you.
Sure.
I would like to know if you have any examples of current day things that are happening versus 20 years ago, because property values and land is expensive now, more so.
Well, yeah, but yes, I can give you some current examples. I just put a couple in here that are about 10 years old, but that's still a while. Here's the point. The property value, the value of a mobile home park as a mobile home park depends on the income it produces. So local properties, let's say residential properties, may have shot up in value, but they're not income producing properties, and they're going to be bought using other criteria. So when you're looking at the value of a mobile home park, the key thing is the size of the mobile home park and what the rents are. How much income does it produce? So, and I should say too, just quickly, the way that this gets figured out is if you can get the park owner interested in dealing with you, the park owner sends to your consultant financial information. He sends 2 or 3 years of financial statements and a rent roll. And that way the consultant can start analyzing using numbers. This is all a numbers game. What the value of the park would be by using an appraisal method called capitalization of net income. So I would say don't look too much at local property values to think that, oh God, parks must be way more expensive now, because the parks are valued not by the local real estate market, but more by the income they produce, if that makes sense.
Any other questions? Are there any questions on Zoom? So I think that might be it for questions, Dave.
Well, that's good. Give me 30 seconds and I'm done. I want to say this. This is complicated stuff, and the best way to figure out what's going on, especially because every park is different, is to contact me, and we can talk and try to figure out what's going on and what your situation is like. That's the next best step you should take to try and figure out if you could do this. Is contact me. My contact information's on the materials, and you can get it easily from the GSMOL website. So I'd love to talk with you. No charge, of course. Give me a call if you'd like to try and figure out your particular situation. And thanks for your coming to the meeting today. Appreciate it.
We have one more question, Dave.
Sure.
Dave, can you look a little bit in the future and tell us big corporations buying into these? Do you see that in the future? And do they have things on the table? So because land's valuable, are they trying to push individual owners like us out so they can, in the long term, buy everything?
Well, they do want to buy everything, that's for sure. What you've got is, I think what you're asking about is big corporations buying your parks and then trying to get rid of the homeowners and developing the park into something else like condominiums or whatever.
Yes.
That can happen, but it's pretty rare. The cities and counties have requirements, federal requirements, and sometimes a thing called a housing element that they have written that requires them to have a certain amount of affordable housing. And when a developer, if a developer could just come in and easily kick people out of the park and build some kind of fancy development, that would destroy affordable housing, and it would penalize the cities and counties for not meeting their goals. So generally, you'll find it's very, very hard in coastal California for a corporation to come in and say, "Oh, let's just kick everybody out and put something new in here." I wouldn't worry about that too much.
Okay, Dave, thank you very much. We appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you. Before we go on to our next speaker, we're going to have just a few minutes for a break. So if you need a break, it's an opportunity that you can meet with some of the other folks, meet some of your fellow homeowners, make a pit stop. We're going to continue at 11 o'clock with Kevin Hooper.